Liebe Elna und Stefan, dear family and friends of Stan. We have shared many fond memories of Stan today and in the days that have gone by. One of my fondest memories is reading his delightfully charming book, Soetwater, about life in a little village in the Klein Karoo. I thoroughly enjoyed this book, and I want to share some extracts from this book, particularly for those who have not yet read it and who might be encouraged to obtain a copy. Otherwise, just grab a cup of tea, relax, and listen to Stan's voice. Soetwater is a small, dusty village tucked away in an isolated corner of the Little Karoo on the banks of the River Khoi. The pebble-strewn riverbed is almost permanently dry, except when somewhere in a distant catchment area an occasional thunderstorm brings down a torrent of brown water in a flood reaching from edge to edge along a width of almost 100 yards. Sometimes such floods arrive completely unannounced under a clear blue sky without a cloud in sight. Children playing in the riverbed with pebbles of all shapes and sizes, smoothly polished by centuries of exposure to water, have little warning of impending danger. With the passage of time, the river has cut through land originally intended for residential purposes. While flooding of this kind has occurred only rarely, the villagers have withdrawn to a somewhat safer distance from the riverbank. This has left small pieces of unused land at several points along the banks, soon forgotten, as the village spread westwards away from the river. Forgotten this land may well have remained had it not been rediscovered by one of the villagers, known to everybody as Tantesi, whose full name, as entered in files dealing with rates and taxes, was Hester Getroude Verjoen. However, the shorter version was not only more practical, but certainly more in keeping with her appearance. She was a short, stocky little woman with flat feet, and a grip of steel that invariably inflicted a painful surprise on those who, on first acquaintance, had unknowingly shaken her hand without bracing themselves first. Tantesi had laid out a vegetable garden on a particularly large stand. Everything she planted, from carrots to cabbages, grew, as if in fear of what Tantesi would do to them if they didn't. Like almost everybody else, she kept poultry, a number of hens and a dependably virile cock that saw to it that the hens responded to the lady's demands, or, as in the days of the old Elizabethans, it would be off with their heads. She even kept a few ducks that, since the water was so scarce, could jolly well do without it. A number of goats, under similar threat, provided her with milk and the means for making cheese. All this was good and fine, but required more water than the tanks would hold, and so she found herself with a dangerously diminished supply. The rest of the story is how Tantesi tries to organize water with her old Erskine truck. Tantesi considered herself to be on cordial terms with the Soetwater officialdom. The truth was that the village councillors lived in mortal fear of a lady who, with one blow of a rock-hard fist, had knocked down a full-grown heifer that had stupidly trod on her toes. And so, in certain practical matters that required only a modicum of intelligence, she could rely on them for advice and possibly help. As Tantesi negotiated the last corner of the street that led to her enterprise, the Erskine uncharacteristically balked. When it did not restart in response to the usual stream of profanity, the lady emerged from her perch behind the large wooden steering wheel and walked around to the broad backside of the vehicle to deliver the customary kick. This This also proved ineffective, so she opened the bonnet, achieved by tugging at two spring-loaded clamps that at times defied even the powerful pull of Tant Hessie's toil-hardened hands. This time, in a strangely helpful mood, the Erskine allowed its owner to inflict upon it the indignity of inspecting its most private parts. Of these she knew nothing, so she left the vehicle where it was, and after pushing her way through several fenced-in private properties, she arrived at the rear entrance to the service station where Herman Laas worked. Herman Laas was a tall, spindly young man whose pale white skin refused to acquire a healthy tan, no matter how lengthy its exposure to the strong Karoo sun. Having listened to the invectives with which Tant Hessie described the behavior of the Erskine, Herman Laas selected from an untidy workbench the tools he needed and transferred them to a steel box. With a stocky little lady trotting beside him to keep up with his long but leisurely strides, Herman Laas used the more conventional route through a gate to the street, in which the Erskine was stolidly awaiting their attention. On arrival at the scene of Tant Hessie's discomfort, Herman opened the other half of the vehicle's bonnet for an unhurried inspection. He then unclasped the lid of his toolbox and with infuriatingly slow deliberation took from it a screwdriver in preference to several others he had discarded after methodical consideration and careful scrutiny. With the two halves of the bonnet neatly folded in the open position, every part of the unresponsive engine was readily accessible. So Herman bent down and poked half of his lanky body into the mysterious depths in search of the trouble. The process was accompanied by a series of grunts and groans in a high tenor that in no way alleviated Tant Hessie's shredded impatience as she watched him twisting and turning the heavy screwdriver in his efforts to inject some sign of life into the Erskine's inside. At last the lady could stand it no longer. "Gee my daai donderse skroewedraaier," she yelled, and punctuated her request with a well-directed kick to Herman's bony buttocks, the only part of his physiology that she could conveniently reach. The power of this forceful action shunted Herman even deeper into the capacious engine compartment, enabling him to crawl over the comparatively small engine and scramble out of the other side in order to escape any of the woman's further ministrations. He made his way back to his toolbox and sat down upon it as he morosely watched her busily rummaging around the engine with the screwdriver she had so unceremoniously taken from the crestfallen mechanic. Suddenly the Erskine inexplicably burst into uproarious life. With a satisfied grunt, she hurled the tool in Herman's general direction, closed both halves of the bonnet with characteristic vigour, then returned to the driver's seat and drove off in a cloud of dust, leaving Herman still seated on his toolbox. His melancholy face showed no change of expression as he watched her out of sight. "Bly dat ek kon help," he murmured.